And a former Nueces County jailer has received 3 years deferred probation as part of a plea deal for his involvement in 2 separate cases in which he was accused of tampering with government records. One of those cases stemming from an investigation after the death of an inmate back in 2018. Our Bill Churchwell has this update.
Javier Zapata Jr. appearing before Judge Sandra Watts via teleconference Friday as he pled guilty on all 4 counts he was facing involving 2 separate cases. 3 of those counts came after the death of an inmate at the Nueces County Jail. You might recall it was back in December of 2018 when an inmate by the name of David Johnson died while in custody. It was later determined by the medical examiner the man died from pre-existing medical conditions. However, an investigation launched after Johnson's death led to an indictment on charges against 3 jailers. Javier Zapata was one of them. The charges included official oppression and tampering with a governmental record. Zapata faced an additional charge of invasive visual recording, specifically by photographing Johnson in the bathroom or while changing clothes without his consent. The men were not charged with causing the inmate's death. Since the initial investigation, it's also important to note that Javier Zapata has been terminated from the sheriff's office. The state asking that Zapata serve 3 years deferred probation and a $1,500 fine. He was also ordered to complete 240 hours of community service. As part of the plea deal, Zapata will also have to testify against any remaining defendants in the case. Last year, a lawsuit was filed by Johnson's son. The 3 jailers are among the defendants listed in that lawsuit. Bill Churchwell, 3 News.